Super Smash Bros., the Nintendo game about your favorite video game characters engaging in fisticuffs. It's pretty safe to say that this is one of the most popular fighting games, if not video games, of all time, and part of that is probably due to its expansive roster. Practically every gaming icon is here. Byleth, Dark Pit, Wii Fit Trainer, only the essentials. This game franchise is without a doubt huge. It started the trend of crossover fighting games, it cultivated a huge esports scene, and of course there's the sheer power and influence of the series itself. Smash Bros. Is likely the reason for many video game franchises staying relevant or regaining popularity. I promise you that before they were in Smash Bros., nobody cared about Captain Falcon or the Ice Climbers or goddamn Pit. I mean, Brawl is literally the reason that Kid Icarus even got a revival in the first place. What I'm getting at is that all of the characters in Smash Bros., obscure or not, have some level of popularity, and popularity leads to fans, which leads to none other than fan games. I mean, even looking at surface level, people like Mario and Sonic very obviously have fan games in spades, but what about someone like the Duck Hunt dog, or Dark Pit, or any Fire Emblem character? I'm sure that a pretty good amount of Smash Bros. Characters have their own fan games, and I don't think I've seen anyone truly look into it, but I'm gonna take that idea just one step further. Since I'm the silly horror guy, today I want to answer the question that absolutely nobody is asking. Just how many Smash Bros. Characters have their own horror games? Now, when I say horror games, I'm really only talking about fan-made ones, because if we were talking official horror games like licensed by Nintendo, this video would be 5 minutes long, and it would be Kirby and Luigi. Now, I won't lie, I did get this idea from Pat Mac and Shay Farillis, who both made amazing videos with similar subjects, but man, this just looked like so much fun, I had to do this myself. I went on an insane hunt trying to find a fan-made horror game for every single character in Smash Bros., and while like 85% of these games I found are Creepypasta games, the list may surprise you in some places. To make things easy, there will be 3 different categories a character can be put into. They have a playable horror game or make a notable appearance in one, they had a horror game or made an appearance in it, but the game is no longer playable or available, or they just don't have a horror game or any presence in a horror game. I'll just be using a basic tier list thing to separate all this just to make it easy for me. Before we really dive in though, I do have a couple rules for what counts, what doesn't, and then what kinda counts. Now, the first and most obvious rule is that the fan game has to be scary, or at least have the intentions to be scary, even if it isn't. Obviously, some games are going to be of questionable quality and horror value, but if they were made with the intention to try to scare someone, I mean, that's a horror game. Next, for the character to count as having a horror game, they must be playable, an antagonist, or a prominent character in the game relative to the length of the game. So if, for example, there was like a 2-minute game and there was like one character in it that barely made an appearance, it might count, but if the game is like half an hour long and they just make like a brief cameo, we're not counting that. Next, the game has to be based on or around the original IP or franchise. This is so that I can't just cheat and find like one Super Smash Bros. Or Nintendo horror game and then just call it a day. The horror game also has to be its own file or game, so that means no ROM hacks, no game platforms like Roblox or Scratch, no mods, which includes Friday Night Funkin', and no Mugen. I didn't find any Mugen horror games, but I wrote that down before anything, so you know what, I'm counting it still. Lastly, the horror game can count towards a character if the character is represented through an OC or like a representation of the character. So for example, if there was like some Luigi monster named Lewis, but it was clear enough that that was supposed to be based on Luigi, then I still count it. Also, before we start, don't go out of your way and harass any of the people who created the games I talk about today. This is a video about Super Smash Bros. It's not that serious. Anyways, without further ado, let's talk about the intriguing and slightly lame question: how many characters in Smash Bros. Have their own horror game? Starting off our entire list, we've got the Italian man Mario, and if you have any idea about the state of creepypasta or horror games online, you have most likely seen a Mario horror game. He has tons of them. Some of my personal favorites include Crucius Mortem by White Void, Mario.exe by Cool Rash and the reimagining of it by Inferno64, Super Mario Dollar by Ziggity, Another Princesses in Our Castle by CM9 Animations, and Mario the Music Box by Corpse Syndrome. recently actually talked to Corpse Syndrome about her game and some of her other work on my new channel Fearful Harmony, which you should go check out. It's basically a talk show where I talk with people in the horror and creepypasta community, so if that sounds up your alley, go drop a sub. Anyways, if I had to pick one of my favorites to represent all Mario horror games, I'd probably have to go with the creepypasta game Mario 85, directed by Raz or Raz Dazzle Do. This is a reimagining of the first Super Mario Bros. Featuring Luigi running through the classic 1-1 level, only to be met by this terrifying giant Mario monster named MX. I love this guy's design, he's just a big ol' silly guy who wants to rip you in half. The game is also extremely difficult for some reason, or at least it was for me, so best of luck trying to beat it. I sure didn't. I don't plan to go crazy in depth with many of the games I talk about, but with Mario 85, you can see me talk about it more in depth on my channel. Anyways, with hundreds of examples under his belt, Mario's the first one on the list to have his own horror game. Next up, we got the king of the jungle himself, Donkey Kong. Now, I didn't have to dig too deep for DK. He does have some horror games, but unfortunately, they're both short and, not very well made. The first one is based on his arcade appearance, titled Donkey Kong PC Port, a short creepypasta game made by Spork XD. It pretends to be the original game until you get to the top, and he turns red! It's pretty straightforward from there. He jump scares you, kills Pauline, kills you, jump scares you again, and the game's over. There's also Donkey Kong.exe from Cool Duck Games, which is a very short EXE game where you play as the Kremlings. If you don't know what a .exe game is, it's basically a creepypasta game inspired by Sonic.exe, where the antagonist likely has red eyes and also likely jump scares you. Also in this game, the evil Donkey Kong just knows your name, which is lovely. Donkey Kong is confirmed to have a horror game. Now, I don't know a lot about Link or Zelda in general, but I did my absolute best here to research, so bear with me. Now, I know there's like a zillion different variants of Link, so for simplicity's sake, let's just stick with adult Link for this. There was like no games with his modern designs like Breath of the Wild or Twilight Princess, but we've got some classic Links here. There's Past.exe made by Randy Becker, which is based on Link to the Past. It's a standard EXE game, you kind of just walk around, get attacked by this evil fairy right here, and get haunted by goddamn Ben Drown the whole time. It's short and there's not much to do except walk around and interact with NPCs, but hey, it fills the criteria for a horror game. Also, do not forget Randy Becker's name. He will come in clutch many times on this list. Speaking of Ben Drown, the creepypasta was quite popular back in the day, so a few games based on the story were made. I don't know if you want to count those or not, but I mean, they exist. There's also Zelda2.exe by Miki Games, where you play as, well, Link. It's even worse than Past.exe, however, it has a part in the game where it took the name of my computer to try and scare me, but it unintentionally took the absolutely amazing name that I gave to my virtual machine, creating this hilarious image. Just like Donkey Kong, Link does have horror games, but unfortunately they're all just older EXE games. Samus is up next, and with Metroid having darker tones in its games, it's perfect horror game material. Metroid.exe was, get this, an EXE game made by none other than Randy Becker. Told you he's important to this video. It's a game about Samus being all like, hey, you're controlling me, I want you dead. There's some bloody creatures involved, some good old fourth wall breaking, and eventually Samus gets both of you killed, as evil Samus fades in and gives you a jump scare. I've noticed that with some of Randy Becker's older horror games, he likes to fade in a scary image slowly and then hit you with a jump scare. I found out your secret, Randy. You can't stop me now. Besides that game, I also found Super Metroid.exe made by Oldham77. I'll go more into depth on this game later in the video, but this game indeed does have you playing as Samus. You can also actually get power-ups and platform in this game. Who knew that EXE games could actually be games? Not me. Samus joins the others in having her own horror game. Now, Samus might have had a few horror games, but the same can't be said for Dark Samus. This is the first roadblock I hit on my journey to find these games. I wasn't able to find anything through my research. I mean, it's literally evil Samus. How could you not lazily slap them into a random EXE game? Wasted potential if you ask me. Bad news for the being of pure Phazon energy, Dark Samus does not have a horror game. Moving on to the polar opposite of evil, Yoshi's up next, and oh boy, the second I got to him, I knew which horror game to talk about. Yoshi.exe, created by Skashi, was an OG creepypasta game. Like, I remember watching this with my brother back in the day and being scared out of my mind for some reason. That jump scare is burned into my memory for life. Anyways, despite my nostalgia for it, this game is really nothing special. You play as Yoshi trying to find Baby Mario as the world around you becomes more and more scary and spooky. It all culminates in a Baby Mario jump scare, a fake out game end, and then a Yoshi jump scare. That's the one that was burned into my mind right there. And let me just say, Martin Scorsese is weeping at this ending as we speak. Fun fact about this game, this image of Yoshi was actually referenced in the Friday Night Funkin' mod Mario's Madness. That's cool and awesome, I think. With this, Yoshi is confirmed to have a horror game. My man Kirby is up next, and I literally just made an entire video about Kirby horror games, so take a wild guess if he has one. To be fair, his games are terrifying enough to count. Have you ever seen The Boss for Crystal Shards? Anywho, Kirby's got a couple horror games under his belt, no surprise. To start, you've got your classic Randy Becker game titled Dreamland.exe. This game features you playing as Kirby, but he's evil! You want to see me go more into depth on it, you can go watch my recent Kirby video, but all you really gotta know is that he eats a Dawaddle Dees and he has sharp teeth. There's also Kirby's Adventure.exe by Polygonist Games, based on the NES game of the same name. Not the .exe part, that wasn't in it. This one's about some evil gray Kirby taking over the game and killing Kirby in various different ways. Kirby joins the ranks of having a horror game. Now, Fox was an interesting one to research because I know next to nothing about Star Fox, so research really wasn't the easiest for me. That being said, I was able to find a horror game, and you will not believe who made it. StarFox.exe, made by Randy Becker, is an actually pretty cool EXE game based on the original Star Fox game. It's pretty cool to see a well-made creepypasta game use 3D, especially some of the models used towards the end. Fox is the main antagonist in this game, and the only character that makes an appearance outside the title screen, so this isn't gonna count towards Falco or Wolf or anyone. Solid game. I do wish it had a little bit more gameplay to it, and also that the jump scares weren't super cliche and bloody, but I mean, hey, I still love EXE games. This proves that Fox McCloud is in a horror game. So far, the research for these characters has been relatively easy, but will his next character break that mold by being tougher than any of the rest? Will I have to scour the internet for hours trying to It's fucking Pikachu, of course it's gonna be easy. Pikachu, being one of the most popular characters just of all time, has a hefty amount of horror games. Of course, you got your classic EXE games such as Uka Keep, created by the Ohm guy. This is a classic creepypasta game from back in the day, actually played by Markiplier for some reason. Alright. It features this red-eye, scary Pikachu who just loves to scream in your face. There's also Pokemon Cursed Forever, also made by the Ohm guy, and also featuring the exact same evil Pikachu. There's not much difference here. Leaving the realm of EXE games for a bit, there's also a multitude of Five Nights at Freddy's games featuring the yellow rodent. Now, we'll talk about a lot more of these later down the line, but yes, FNAF games count. These are fan games of FNAF. Nothing in my rule said I couldn't include these in my video. Sue me. I won't lie though, these FNAF games made the video so much easier. So many characters just made an appearance as an animatronic in these FNAF games, and automatically they count because of that. Pikachu alone has Five Nights at Pikachu's, Five Nights at Pikachu's 2, Five Nights at Team Rocket, you name it, there's like a million of these. However, probably my favorite Pikachu horror game was made by the YouTuber Vibing Leaf. They make tons of these retellings of old creepypastas and horror games, it's pretty sick. One of my favorite things they've made, however, is the game Pokemon, featuring this creepy, distorted Pikachu asking you to, skin and deliver the meat of animals to him. But how could you say no to that smile right there? You've got it, horrifyingly warped Pikachu monster. I won't go too deep into this game since I'd like to cover it one day, but just know that it's a fun, dreamlike experience that you might find kinda creepy. With all that said, this electric rat does indeed have a horror game. Up next, we've got Luigi, and I mean, we already talked about him being in Mario 85, so really you could just cross him off the list. That's no fun though, so I'll talk about a few games that feature him just a bit more prominently. TooLate.exe is an EXE game made by Mr. Pixel Productions, where you play as a grieving Mario who recently lost his brother. Thankfully though, Luigi comes back to life, he just, looks a little different. This Luigi creature named Mr. L puts you through hell as you have to escape from his big meaty grippers. I like this one, and he's also featured in that one Mario FNF mod. Nice. There's also the game Luigi's Insanity, which is more based on Luigi's Mansion series. I do love that idea. Luigi's Mansion was already pretty creepy for a Nintendo game, so you're hitting gold making that into a horror experience. Anyways, this game was pretty cool, exploring this new creepy mansion and avoiding the Luigi ghost who tries to hunt you down throughout the mansion. Once again, I do like seeing horror fan games that aren't .exe games. Not that I have anything wrong with EXE games, it's just that I like to see my scary Luigis without red and black eyes sometimes, you know? Ness from Earthbound, the game I've started like 10 times but never actually played. Now, with a game like Earthbound, that is prime for horror. Giygas alone had tons of creepypasta content surrounding him back in the day, but even with this, there's surprisingly no horror game featuring Ness, let alone Earthbound. This took me by surprise because I feel like an Earthbound horror game would be a cool concept. And once again, ROM hacks don't count, so things like the Halloween hack made by Toby Fox sadly aren't valid here. I did find this incredible scratch project called layness.exe, so I mean, there's that. Ness unfortunately does not have a horror game. Moving on to the Captain, one of my favorite characters to play in Smash, I looked deep to find a horror game involving him. I'm a pretty big fan of F-Zero, so I was curious to see what an F-Zero horror game would look like, but unfortunately, I couldn't find anything. However, as of making this video, Randy Becker made a post on GameJolt asking if anyone would want to see an F-Zero horror game be made. So, I mean, this part could be dated pretty fast if he puts it out there, but as of this video, Captain Falcon does not have any horror games. Jigglypuff was a tricky one, which I wasn't expecting considering her popularity. I remember that one creepy image of her that people used in thumbnails all the time, but that was about it. Thankfully, the Five Nights at Freddy's fan games came in clutch, with Five Nights at Team Rocket HQ Recoded, created by Nintendo Land Pikachu. Holy shit, Pikachu made this? His ass cannot code, he does not have thumbs. Anyways, this is your pretty standard FNAF fan game, having you monitor your cameras for Pokemon coming to attack you. You could play sounds to scare the Pokemon away from your office, but don't sit on the cameras for too long or else Jigglypuff will get you. See, there's Jigglypuff right there being evil and scary, add her to the list. Now, all 12 original Smash 64 characters are out of the way, and Dark Samus I guess, but the most terrifying thing is yet to come, because as we move into the characters from Melee, we have to talk about something truly scary. Fire Emblem characters. I'm not even a big Fire Emblem hater. If anything, I'm a Xenoblade hater. Starting off our Melee roster, we have Princess Peach. Being a Mario character, she automatically has like a 90% chance of having a horror game, and lo and behold, she has multiple. She is killed off in quite a few random games, but she has more prominent roles than other ones. One questionable example is Peach.exe, made by Albert Games. This is a creepypasta game so bad that it is absolutely incredible. Peach is playable in the last level along with the other two Mario princesses, but we'll get to that when we get to that. At the end, there's also the child from FNAF, and then an image of a child as a jump scare. Alright, gotcha. My favorite Princess Peach horror game, though, is without a doubt Another Princess is in Our Castle, made by CM9 Animation. This is a Super Mario 64 themed horror game that I am a huge fan of. Basically, the premise is that you, Mario, have to go in this castle and collect the souls of the enemies from Mario 64. Kinda like Slender. You're not alone in the castle, though. You have to avoid these little evil toads that wander around, and of course, Peach. Well, it's not exactly Peach, but it's like scary ghost Peach, but hey, it counts. Anyways, I talked about this in my first Mario horror video, so go check that out for a more in-depth review of this game. Princess Toadstool indeed has a horror game. Okay, Daisy is super easy because we literally just talked about a game that had her, Peach.exe. The portion where you play as Daisy has you wandering around what appears to be a school, and then scary music starts to play while crying occurs, and then a fucking heart monitor noise starts playing. I was laughing so hard at that. Why does a heart rate monitor noise play? Anyways, I'll move quickly here. Daisy goes into the has a horror game category. Bowser's up next, and you best believe the King of the Koopas has horror games. When I began research, 2 games came to mind, and both of them are, everybody say it with me now, EXE. The first one is called inkbowser.exe, which was created by Tarkan809, and if you like Bendy in the Ink Machine, you are about to lose your goddamn mind. You play as Mario going through the classic Super Mario Bros. Until you eventually come across this strange green goo. That's when Big Green himself makes an appearance and attacks you, I think. He also proceeds to kill Peach and then kill you, all while using his iconic green ink from the games. You remember the green ink? It was everywhere. Remember in Mario Galaxy? That was a crazy fight. It's an alright game, at least it has a cool aesthetic. I do love green goop after all. The other Bowser horror game is called King Slaughter by Night Akio, and goddamn, that's a metal name. Probably my favorite part of the game was the title. Anyways, the game involves you playing as Luigi, Toad, and Peach, all trying to survive the crazy Bowser monster. They don't succeed, by the way. The sprites in this game are also pretty nice, I can't lie. There is a few things about this game that are silly though, like this typo where Bowser says he's feeling whore, and this jump scare that was clearly meant for the YouTuber Luigi Kid, and not my dumb purple ass. Anyways, Bowser makes his way onto the has a horror game list. Now, with Ice Climbers, do you really think the Ice Climbers, the characters who had one game back on the NES in the 80s, is going to have a single fan game made about it? What if I told you it had one of the best horror games on this list? Frozen Inferno, an Ice Climbers horror game, was made by White Void, and is honestly one of the coolest EXE games I think I've ever played. You play as Nana, the pink ice climber, and you have to make your way up this frozen mountain. After being attacked by a disfigured Popo, the blue ice climber, you're left to climb an even more challenging mountain. This is where you actually have to play a game. Like I said, I love when EXE games have actual gameplay. Falling platforms, snow monsters, grabby hands, this game has it all. It's fairly short, only taking me like 10 minutes to beat, but I'd say it's quite worth your time. I won't spoil the ending because it's honestly pretty sick. I say you go and check this one out for yourself. Anyways, the Ice Climbers somehow have a horror game. Sheik's up next, and until I started this video, I had no clue that they were only in Ocarina of Time. I thought that Sheik was just a normal reoccurring character, but nope, guess not. This just goes to show how clueless I am about The Legend of Zelda. Anyways, unless you want to count them as Zelda, they do not have any horror games under their belt. Moving on. Now, Zelda, on the other hand, surprisingly doesn't have many. In fact, after literal hours of straight research, I was only able to find proof of one horror game featuring Zelda, called Alone.exe. She isn't even playable, she's just one of the enemies that attacks you when you play as Link. Now, I was really debating on whether or not to count this as her appearing in a horror game, but considering that this game looks relatively short, I'll just consider her one of the main antagonists. However, the issue is that Alone.exe just doesn't exist anymore. The only proof of its existence I could find was a couple YouTube videos. So, Zelda is the first one on the list to enter the category of had a horror game, but it's no longer available. Up next, we've got Dr. Mario, the character that made me ask for Melee for my birthday when I was 6. Anyways, I knew going into this video that he actually does have a horror game, and this is where our old pal Randy Becker comes back into play with drmario.exe. This game is an interesting one, having you scour the dark hospital of Dr. Mario. Hijinks ensue after this, such as being chased by a virus, having a giant Dr. Mario head float towards you, and having the doctor himself jump scare you towards the end. It's a visually nice game, but also kinda silly at the same time. Anyways, MD Mario is confirmed to have a horror game. Pichu was a pretty annoying one to look for. Besides this one person on GameJolt who continuously makes Pichu themed horror games on Scratch, keep it up by the way, I really couldn't find anything. GameJolt, Itch.io, YouTube videos, just Google searching Pichu.exe, it was all barren and I was losing hope. this is where I developed my technique. The ability where I look at FNAF fan games, and sure enough, there's Pichu. Five Nights at Pikachu's 2 The Escape, made by X Worry. I'm sorry if I pronounced that wrong. This is a very stressful FNAF fan game where you have to house sit and then be attacked by a bunch of 3D models. Now, I will be honest, this was like the last game I played for this video, and I was pretty burnt out by that point, so I didn't play this one all the way through to get to Pichu, but here's video proof of him being in the game. Awesome. Pichu is a confirmed horror game participant. Falco's up next, and I've got some bad news for all the Mordecai fans out there. He doesn't have one. He wasn't in StarFox.exe beyond the title screen, he doesn't have any other features in horror games, nothing. He was in this SNES ROM hack of Star Fox that featured the entire Star Fox crew pretty prominently, but that's about it. There's next to no Star Fox fan games out there, let alone horror ones. Damn, the Star Fox neglect from Nintendo got so bad that it leaked into the fan games. With that, Falco falls into the doesn't have a horror game category. Marth, the first Fire Emblem rep, is up next, and I'll just tell you now, I had zero faith that I'd find Fire Emblem horror games. But surprisingly, Marth managed to squeak his way into one with the game called Fire Emblem Shadows Dragon Rearmed, aka Marth.exe, created by Briver. This was originally made for April Fool's Day, but I'm fairly certain it wasn't a joke game, so it counts. Anyways, booting up this game, it really was terrifying because it made me actually learn how to play Fire Emblem. Would you believe me if I told you this was my first ever Fire Emblem game? Anyways, after fighting the enemies for a little bit, everybody disappears except for Marth. Marth then like screams and disappears, and then you play as this one dude who now has to run from Marth. I know jack shit about Fire Emblem, so I'm sorry if I don't know any names. Anyways, Marth's evil now and is on the attack. This game actually has a boss fight, multiple endings, and a strangely nice picture of Marth.exe. I think it's something about the red hair with the gray skin that just makes the character design look really nice. There's potential here, hear me out. Anyways, to save both you and me some precious time, this was the only Fire Emblem horror game that I was able to find. So what that means is that any Fire Emblem character from here on out is likely 100% on the no horror game list. Sorry about that. Marth breaks off from the Swordsman family members, however, and has his own horror game. Alright, well, I just got done explaining Fire Emblem reps, so really, what do you think Lucina falls into? She's got nothing. Next. Next, we've got Young Link, and this is specifically the Young Link from Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask. No using the previously mentioned horror games that counted for adult Link, that's a different character. Thankfully, I already briefly mentioned one horror game that includes this version of Link, titled Remember.exe, made by, I believe, Sam Kirby Moyer. This game was taken down a while ago, so it was hard to find the OG creator. If I'm wrong here, please correct me in the comments. However, this does not fall into the unavailable category because you can still play re-uploads to this day. This was a creepy short horror game based on the Ben Drowned creepypasta, where you wander around for a bit, fight against the happy mask salesman from Majora's Mask, get crushed by a moon, etc. This game also apparently can restart your PC. It didn't happen to me for some reason, but I've seen it happen to others who play this one, so if you do decide to play this on your own time, have caution. Now, you might be able to make the argument that you're playing as Young Link, since this is based on Majora's Mask, but he also just straight up appears a few times throughout the game. He's dead, but I mean, he's there. Now, since the original Ben Drowned story and ARG centered pretty heavily around Young Link, I think it's fair to say that Young Link played a big enough part in this game to count going by my rules. I may be stretching a little bit for this one, but oh well, what are you gonna do about it? Young Link joins his older counterpart on the horror game list. Still on Zelda characters, we've got Ganondorf up next. Now, even if I were to consider every iteration of Ganon, I honestly couldn't find anything. Now, once again, I could just be ass at researching franchises I know nothing about, but I swear I did everything I could. However, while I couldn't find any game downloads, going back to the horror game Zelda was in, Alone.exe, Ganondorf is actually featured in that game too. He's not playable or an antagonist, but he's shown towards the last part of the game dead, and the end of the game makes a pretty big point of it. Good enough for me. Ganondorf goes into the no longer available category. The ultimate life form, not that one, the ultimate life form, Mewtwo, is up next, and you best believe he's in a FNAF fan game. My tactic for difficult characters after Pichu was just to go through FNAF, so Mewtwo was an absolute breeze. He's a main antagonist in both Five Nights at Team Rocket HQ Recoded and Five Nights at Team Flare HQ, where he just kinda sits in a tube and will attack you at some point. I played both of these a hefty amount and I wasn't able to get him to attack, but hey, here's some footage of him doing so. My GOAT Mewtwo makes it into the has a horror game category. Up next is Roy, and sadly, he suffers from the Fire Emblem curse and does not have a horror game. He was one of my favorites to play in Smash Wii U though. Stand proud, Roy. You were strong. If Roy didn't have one, Chrom sure as hell doesn't have one. Chrom just immediately joins his better half in the doesn't have a horror game category. I'd say this is a great time to remind you to use code ToadBup for 10% off at GamerSupps. Go get yourself a tub or shaker cup today. It's what Chrom would have wanted. So, Mr. Game & Watch is next on the list, and he was kinda tricky to search for. Do I count the character himself? Do I count any instances of a Game & Watch character in a horror game? Cause technically, Mr. Game & Watch is a Smash original, he's just kind of an amalgamation of Game & Watch. For the sake of fairness and keeping things simple, I decided only to count the character himself. Even without counting only the character, Mr. Game & Watch was not featured in any horror games. I did find this one Game & Watch inspired horror game on Steam though, called Summer Night, made by Airdorf, the same creator behind Faith. Honestly, this may be one of my favorites I've played so far. It's simple, a really cool concept, and kinda creepy. Go check it out on Steam or itch.io if you have the time. Ending out our Melee reps, Mr. Game & Watch does not have a horror game. Now we move on to the characters from Brawl, and this one was kind of a mixed bag for me, because like on one hand you have more obscure characters like Pit or Rob the Robot, but on the other hand you have people like Sonic the Hedgehog, which like, let's be real, what Sonic character doesn't have a horror game at this point? Starting off our Brawl journey is one of my favorites, Meta Knight. Now, originally I had him down as no horror game, but while I was writing this script, I was actually able to find a single one including him. Yes, I had to go with the FNAF fan game route, don't hate me because I'm a genius. Nightmares with Meta Knight, or Meta Nightmares, was made by the Kirby Genius and is actually a fan game of a fan game. This was apparently based on the third Five Nights at Wario's game. Okay, spoilers for Wario, he has one, but a fan game of a fan game based on this guy is just so silly. Anyways, this game's just a demo, but thankfully Meta Knight attacks on the first night, trying to get into this living room area. Meta Knight joins the ranks of a horror game haver. Next we've got Pit, who surprisingly has an appearance or two in some horror games. Most of them aren't major enough to actually count, except for one. Kid Icarus.exe, made by Nicola DeRay, is a super short and super not good exe game where you play as Pit, walk to the right for a bit, see Palutena dead, why did that rhyme? See Palutena dead, and then the game pretty much ends after that. No joke, this game is like less than 2 minutes long, but I mean, hey, I never said the games had to be scary or good. I am glad that this game exists though, because it does give Pit a horror game. Wait, where's the download link? Okay, this game unfortunately isn't anywhere online. I even asked Luigi Kid himself, but nope, this game seems to be lost to time. Pit has a horror game alright, it's just no longer available. My Smash Ultimate main, Dark Pit, is up next. Now, this one is a really weird scenario because he does have a horror game, but I'm not sure if it goes against the rules. Five Nights at Dark Pit was made by the Kirby Genius, the same creator behind the Meta Knight game. Now, this game does take place in Palutena's temple and features Dark Pit as the main antagonist, but there is a hefty amount of Smash Bros. Influence here. The other antagonists are all Smash Bros. Characters, including obscure ones like Lucina and Rob, and the description itself even says it's influenced by Smash Bros., so this might violate the no Smash or Nintendo rule. It was a pretty tough decision, but how about this? I will count this game for Dark Pit, but none of the other characters in the game. This means Lucina and Rob have nothing. I think it's just focused enough on Kid Icarus to count, but only Dark Pit's getting the point here. Dark Pit very barely has his own horror game. Now, Zero Suit Samus technically is in the previously mentioned Metroid horror games. I mean, she's there in that darn suit right there. Surely that counts, you silly goose. Adoy. Yeah, I'm not gonna try to pull a fast one like that. Just like Dark Samus, Zero Suit Samus does not appear in any horror games. Now, my boy Wario, on the other hand, has quite a few horror games under his belt. Now, like I said earlier, being a Mario character pretty much guarantees you at least one, but not for his biker uniform, sadly, but we still count normal Wario. And in my mind, no other horror game represents Wario more than Five Nights at Wario's, made by WWW Wario. That was a lot of Wario. This is an ongoing series of FNAF fan games featuring Wario and the gang, and I loved this series back when it came out. Just going over the first game briefly, you basically have to survive in a factory haunted by Wario, Waluigi, Mario, Luigi, and Peach. Wario is the head goon here though, so with that being said, Wario indeed has a horror game. The first third-party character on the list, Snake, is up next. Now, even if we didn't specifically use Solid Snake, I couldn't find a single Metal Gear horror game out there. Snake joins the No Horror Game Club. Ike suffers from the same curse as the other Fire Emblem characters. Maybe if Path of Radiance wasn't a zillion dollars on eBay, he'd be more popular. He does have a cool design though. Ike goes into the No Horror Game category. Okay, Pokemon Trainer is weird because they're like 4 characters. You have Charizard, Squirtle, Ivysaur, and the trainer himself. I'll just rapid fire through all 4 and say who does and doesn't have a horror game. Charizard is featured in the Creepypasta game Snow on Mount Silver, made by Annie M. You can battle him in this game, but he, looks like he's seen better days. You can also battle a version of Charizard in the previously mentioned horror game Pokemon. He also looks like he's seen better days there too. Poor guy cannot catch a break. Ivysaur's up next, and yeah, he has nothing. Not even the Five Nights at Freddy's method worked for him. Squirtle also has nothing, unless you want to count this Scratch FNAF game that I found where he can attack you on night 1. Now, I would love to count this, but even though it is a separate executable file, I did say no Scratch, and this is Scratch. I already bent the rules kinda heavily for Dark Pit, so I don't want to get too silly with the rules here. Squirtle is a no-go. Last but not least is Pokemon Trainer, whose base costume is based on the trainer Red from the original games, but he does also have many alts of the other male and female trainers from past games. There are a couple horror games that have these trainers featured prominently. Pokemon Curse Forever and Uka Keep that were mentioned earlier have you play as Red, while the Creepypasta games Lost Silver and Snow on Mount Silver have you playing as the trainer Gold, who's also represented through an alt. Either way, 2 out of the 4 characters that are a part of Pokemon Trainer do have a horror game. Diddy Kong is up next, and while he doesn't appear in any of the Donkey Kong horror games previously mentioned, he does make an appearance in the game DK Hotel, made by Vired TTM. This game has you playing as a janitor at the prestigious Donkey Kong Hotel. I'm sorry, Donkey Kong has a hotel chain? Imagine being conceived in the King K. Rool themed hotel room. Anyways, you just have to survive while cleaning, and one of the people who can attack you is none other than Diddy Kong. This was a pretty silly game that I kind of enjoyed my time with. Diddy Kong joins the ranks of having a horror game. Lucas is basically in the same boat as Ness. He's got no appearances in a horror game. I really tried to find anything Mother or Earthbound related, but I just couldn't find anything. Not even a Duster.exe? Come on, Game Jolt, step up your game. Now's the time all of you ToadBup fans have been waiting for. Let's talk about the blue, bloody bastard. Okay, do I even, have to say anything for this guy? Sonic the Hedgehog has horror games, so many horror games, that people have been able to talk about his horror games for the past decade, non-stop. Hell, he probably has more than Mario does. I really wouldn't be surprised. Obviously, you've got Sonic.exe, the classic creepypasta game from the early 2010s by Mist Crimson, based on the shitty story by the same name. Rather than just talk about the OG Sonic.exe, I'm gonna take the time to rattle off a few Sonic horror games that I'm actually a big fan of. Sonic 2011 is a remake of Sonic.exe made by Joe Doughboy. It's basically just Sonic.exe, but better. Green Mountain was a mysterious Sonic horror game where you climb a mountain and fight a Sonic goo monster. Great stuff. Depraved Hedgehog was yet another Sonic EXE game made by Lahar, which has some of the most insane fourth wall breaks and some amazing art. Like, it literally will print out a picture. Like, what other game does that? El Pendrive Azul is a game based on the story of the same name made by Vibing Leaf. It's a short haunted Sonic game, but with some cool ass visuals and a concerning amount of flashing lights. Lastly is one of my favorite EXE games out there, Sonic.EYX, made by Kawa16 and Cloudy Jolt. It's a reimagining of the Sonic EXE character in a creepy, gory, and great Sonic horror game. I recommend you check out all the games mentioned, but beware for fourth wall breaks, flashing lights, and blue pieces of shit. Sonic gets his own rank above the others, just call it Sonic.exe, I guess. Now, King Dedede was in a game mentioned earlier in the list. In the game Dreamland.exe, you actually have to play as Dedede after the evil Kirby eats and absorbs him. You gotta walk through these gross Kirby meat tunnels until you're attacked and killed. Great stuff. King Dedede goes onto the horror game having list. Alamar's up next, and I've actually recently been playing through Pikmin 1 for the first time, so I guess you could say I'm somewhat of an expert now. There wasn't much for Pikmin horror games, and honestly, I thought I was gonna have to throw in the towel. That was until I found this game called Slender Louie by Star_Sean. This was a short Slender-like game where you have to collect items and avoid Louie from Pikmin 2. Now, there's no models or actual visuals indicating that it's him, but according to the game and the Game Jolt page, you are playing as Olimar, so we count it. Olimar is confirmed to be in a horror game. Okay, this one actually kind of surprised me. Lucario doesn't seem to appear in any horror games out there. I would have put money on him being in a FNAF fan game. Like, come on, just slap him over Foxy. Lucario, as far as I am aware, has got nothing. Rob the Robot, being an obscure toy from the 80s, has pretty much nothing when it comes to video game appearances. Now, normally this wouldn't be a problem, as demonstrated by the Ice Climbers, but unless you want to count his appearance in Five Nights at Dark Pit, which I'm not, he's got no horror games. Toon Link, the last Zelda rep from Smash, is up next. Legend of Zelda horror games were already pretty difficult to find, let alone one in the Toon style. Nothing based on Minish Cap or Wind Waker or anything, Toon Link's got next to nothing. He barely scrapes his way out of 0 horror games with the game Five Nights at Hyrule, made by Pizza Dinosaur 15. Five Nights at Hyrule was a demo for a Zelda-themed FNAF game featuring different Links coming to attack you. And if you look real close, you can see that one of these Shadow Links is indeed Toon Link. Unfortunately for the little fella, this game is no longer available for download, meaning that Toon Link did have a horror game, but it's no longer available. Finishing up our Brawl characters, we've got one of the coolest Star Fox characters, Wolf. Like I said earlier with Fox, he was the only one to make an appearance in StarFox.exe, and there was next to nothing for Star Fox horror games, and that sadly means bad news for our Wolfie boy here. Wolf does not make any appearances in a horror game. And with that, we are officially over halfway through the list of characters. Now, I know this is a long ass video, but don't worry because the speed's gonna kinda pick up from here, because going into Smash for Wii U and 3DS, some of the characters are a lot more obscure, and some of the characters are newer, which honestly made things a little bit harder to research. But if you really thought that Robin was going to have a horror game, you might want to sit down for this one. Beginning our plunge into the Smash for Wii U and 3DS roster, we've got the Villager. Remember all those evil Villager memes from back when he was announced? It was like Killager or something. That was a strange time. It seemed to pay off for him though, because not only are there Animal Crossing horror games, but this specific villager from City Folk was the one featured multiple times. First up is a super short EXE game, expertly titled Animal Crossing.exe, made by Bones the Creepypasta Hunter. You play as the villager, go into the woods to meet up with KK Slider, get f***ed over by KK Slider, turn evil, kill Isabelle, game over, I feel hollow. There's also Five Nights at Villagers by Jay Lariah, yet another Five Nights at Freddy's fan game. I could have literally just made this about FNAF fan games instead of horror games, and I think I would have just been fine. It's FNAF with the villager from City Folk. Look, there he is right there, that's him, yep. The villager appears in his fair share of horror games. Mega Man, being an icon of gaming, is less prominent in the horror world than you might expect. That didn't stop him from procuring some good old EXE games though. Mega Man.exe, made by Alfonso Brito, is a return-to-form EXE game, a walking simulator with random jump scares. Not only that, but a haunted Mega Man with bloody eyes tries to kill you. Doesn't get better than this, folks. You want my opinion on how to improve an experience like this? For one, get rid of the jump scares that have nothing to do with Mega Man, and also just throw some gameplay in there. Something like some simple platforming or enemies really goes a long way. There was also this kinda neat Mega Man X horror game called The Red Cartridge, made by Not So Davy. It's technically not the correct Mega Man, but it's still kinda neat. Mega Man is confirmed to have his own horror game. Wii Fit Trainer, very surprisingly, does not have a horror game. She's the main character of goddamn Wii Fit. I don't know what you can do with that. Somebody prove me wrong though. I am begging for a Wii Fit horror game to be made. Make the game like, say you're dying or something. I don't know, that's a cool concept. It's all yours, you can have it. Rosalina and Luma are up next, and we don't count Luma for this, sorry. Now this one was tricky, because I thought I had it in the bag with Rosalina.exe, but be honest, would you consider this a game? Thankfully, Peach.exe, from way at the beginning of the video, comes in clutch here, as Rosalina is the first character you play as. It's a sprite edit of Peach, but you know what, it counts as a horror game for her. Moving on. Little Mac, the bruiser from the Bronx, sadly has not boxed his way into a horror game yet. Although an honorable mention goes to this work-in-progress game called Terrible Terry's Punch-Out, made by Pancake PK. Apparently, Terrible Terry is this crazy EXE character based on Punch-Out, and from what I've read of the Creepypasta and like what surrounds the Creepypasta, it honestly sounds like a cool concept. Keep it up, PK, be the first ever creator of a Punch-Out horror game, but for now, the Mac goes on the no horror game list. Joining Little Mac in the horror gameless wasteland is Greninja. I really looked for him. Like I said, almost every somewhat popular Pokemon is in a FNAF fan game, but guess not this guy. Moving on. Mii Fighter is up next, and this one is a bit tricky. Mii Fighters are just different ways to play as your Mii. It's not those Mii specifically, so I will count any horror games that feature the Miis prominently, which thankfully I was able to find some. Five Nights at... God damn it, more FNAF fan games! Five Nights at Miiverse is a FNAF fan game made by Val Travel Games featuring the Miis. I honestly couldn't figure this one out. I got jump scared like 4 times and then gave up. But I mean, hey, this is a horror game where Miis attack you, so we count it. Palutena is up next, and she's kind of in a horror game. In the previously mentioned Kid Icarus.exe, she's found dead at the end of the game. Now, considering this game is like 2 seconds long and she's like the main scare of the game, I'll count her as having a major enough role in the game. Unfortunately, Kid Icarus.exe is no longer available, putting her in the same category as Pit. Now, Pac-Man, on the other hand, has quite a few horror games, but sadly, nothing I could find with this Pac-Man world design. Any Pac-Man is Pac-Man though, so we run it. Pac-Man is a classic EXE game made by Barrick. It's titled Pac-Man, but it's like scary text. This is a creepy take on the arcade game, featuring much more limited vision and new ghosts with some nasty abilities. This game is honestly really fun and a solid horror experience. I won't go too into depth, but give this one a play if you can. Pac-Man goes into the horror game Havers. No, moving on. Up next is Shulk, and I feel like Xenoblade just doesn't lend itself to EXE games or creepypasta stuff or really anything horror related. I don't know, I just don't see someone being like, oh man, I can't wait to slap red scary eyes on that guy. Never said that was a bad thing, but still. Even with that in mind, I did do some deep research and I came up with nothing. Shulk does not have a horror game under his belt. Okay, so Bowser Jr. was kinda funny. I couldn't find any horror games based on Bowser Jr. from the Mario games, but I did find one based on Bowser Jr. from Super Mario Logan. Bowser Jr.'s existential nightmare was made by Jeffy1_2D31, an immaculate name. This is a short horror experience where you play as Bowser Jr., yes that's him, stuck in his dad's closet. He freaks out, the game starts screaming at you, and then, yeah. I know this technically isn't a Mario horror game, but you know what? That's Bowser Jr., it's centered around the Mario characters, I count it. Add him to the has a horror game category. Duck Hunt Dog surprisingly doesn't have anything. I don't know why, but I was totally expecting some random game from 2013 called duckhunt.exe to exist. Despite this, there is a pretty well-known VR horror game based on Duck Hunt called Duck Season, which unlike most of the games on this list, is actually kinda creepy. So, Duck Hunt Dog might have lost the battle, but he won the war. No horror games for him. Alright, let's make this next part easy. None of the newcomer DLC characters from Wii U have a horror game. Ryu, his Echo Fighter Ken, Cloud, Corrin, and Bayonetta are all without horror games. What, you telling me there's no Ken.exe? What the hell, man? Like I said earlier, as the characters get newer like Bayonetta and Corrin, then they tend to have a lot less horror games or even fan games in general. But hold on to your seats because we are almost done as we dive into Smash Ultimate. And also Sans. We're including Sans in this. Starting the beginning of the end, Inkling is up next. Now, Splatoon was an absolute smash hit, so it's really no surprise to me that at least one horror-themed fan game existed. Squid Proxy, made by Inky Crow, is a slender Splatoon game where you have to play as both the male and the female Inkling. Bam! Covers both of them right there. You have to collect these, diodes? I don't know, man. Slender gives you the most random shit to collect sometimes. You could be playing a Slender game that'd be like, alright, you're in an old playground and you have to collect 14 vintage microwaves. Move quickly. The antagonist is also an Inkling, I think, but either way, the Inkling makes an appearance in a horror game. Ridley is up next, who's honestly terrifying on his own. Thankfully, he appears as the main antagonist in a game mentioned way at the beginning, titled Super Metroid.exe. He's basically the one hiding in the shadows and killing until you get to the end, coming after Samus and by extension, you! That's great and all, but what if there was another Five Nights at Freddy's fan game? Oh yeah, that's the stuff. Five Nights at Ridley's by Hyrule Goji 98 is a FNAF fan game about, you guessed it, Ridley. It's okay if you don't like this one though, because there's 3 sequels to try out too. Ridley makes his way onto the horror game category. Alright, I'll just rope them together since I had the exact same issue with both. Simon and Richter from Castlevania were actually difficult characters to decide, because for both of them, I thought I found a candidate. I found these Castlevania fan games that had hashtag horror in the tags that featured both of them as playable characters, and I did say that as long as the intention was to be scary, it would count. But after playing both of these games, it feels like there was nothing horror related in them. Unless you want to count the enemies being bats and zombies, does that really count as horror? I'm making the judgment call to say no. Richter and Simon do not have horror games. The King of the Kremlins is up next, and thankfully we already know the answer to this. K. Rool was featured in 2 games already mentioned in this video. He was an antagonist in the game DK Hotel and a playable character in Donkey Kong.exe, where he was brutally murdered by the Donkey Kong who knew my name. King K. Rool officially has a horror game. Not like officially. I don't think Nintendo would approve of this. Then we've got Isabelle, who actually does prominently feature in a horror game. She was one of 3 characters featured in that very short Animal Crossing.exe game, and she was also the big scare and big kill of the game. Now, I debated counting this for a while because, like, it's really not a major role, but it's a big enough role relative to the game's size and what the game is, so fuck it, we count it. Finishing up the onslaught of Pokemon is Incineroar, who, just like Greninja, does not feature in any horror games. I wasn't too surprised by this. He is a relatively new Pokemon, and also my tactic of finding FNAF fan games was starting to falter at this point. Incineroar joins the ranks of those without a horror game. Piranha Plant starts up our list of DLC characters, and believe it or not, a Piranha Plant is actually a major boss battle in a Mario horror game. Super Mario Dolor, made by Ziggity, is one of my favorite Mario horror games. It's this grungy looking 3D Mario fan game that seems pretty normal for a bit, and then bam, it gets all good and scary. The first big boss fight of the game is a Piranha Plant, both a normal and a scary one, so yes, the plant has a feature in a horror game. Now we move into the DLC characters from Smash Ultimate, and I'll be honest, most of them don't have a horror game. So to save on time, I'm just going to talk about the ones that do, and skip over the rest of them instead of just going, no, 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 No. Now, out of all 11 DLC characters, Joker, all versions of Hero, Terry, Byleth, Min Min, Pyra, Mithra, Kazuya, and Sora all fall into the no horror game category. That leaves us with 3 characters remaining, and Sans, he's also here. First up is Banjo and Kazooie, who do have a horror game, but I was kind of flip-flopping between no and yes, but hear my reasoning. Banjo.exe, made by Bones the Creepypasta Hunter, is a 3D EXE game based on a creepypasta that they found, and at first, I thought this was kind of a joke game. I saw it in the description, played the goofy Banjo game, and I kinda made peace with my decision of saying no. However, I then read in the files of the game that this was an attempt to make the creepypasta scary? That seems like a horror game to me. The game's a bit goofy, yeah, but I feel like that was kind of the purpose, even if it did want to be scary as well. But even with all of that, I declare Banjo and Kazooie be put into the havers of horror games. Steve from Minecraft is up next, and it's Minecraft. Of course they have everything under the sun, including horror games. Now, it was a little difficult whittling through mods and maps and other horror Minecraft stuff I knew about, but I did pick out one. Error 422 by Super Metavis is a Minecraft horror game where you play a very glitched out Minecraft. Now, this obviously is just Minecraft, but like with some mod or something put into it, but it was its own download and executable file, and I didn't need Minecraft to run this. So, because of my janky rules, it counts. If you don't think that counts, there's also A Craft of Mine by Sir Tartarus, which has you playing in a Minecraft server. There's nothing saying you aren't playing as the Steve skin, but even if you aren't playing as the Steve skin, in Smash Bros there are multiple skins for Steve. So, you know what? I'm counting it. There you go. And wrapping up the Smash roster that has horror games, Sephiroth prominently features in the absolute masterpiece, Sephiroth.exe, made by Just Sharko. Now, this was a similar situation to Dark Pit, where Sephiroth is the main focus, but it included other characters from Smash Bros. However, I'll just do what I did for the Dark Pit game, only Sephiroth gets to count. Sorry, Cloud, you weren't spared for this one. Anyways, this game is unintentionally hilarious. I love hearing Sephiroth spew one-liners over and over as I had to fight him. Great stuff. Sephiroth does appear in a horror game. And because why not, Sans is our last character on the list. He has a Mii Fighter costume and also it's funny. Sans actually has quite a few horror games that he features in, but one of my personal favorites from back in the day was the demo for Horror Tale. This was a point-and-click Undertale horror game where you interacted with both Scary Sans and Scary Papyrus. I always loved how this game looked. Sans is confirmed to appear in quite a few horror games. And with that, Finally, we can answer the question, how many characters in Smash Bros have horror games? Let's look at the stats, shall we? 42 characters have a horror game to their name or made a major enough appearance in a horror game. 40 characters, on the other hand, did not make an appearance in a horror game at all or not major enough of an appearance. 5 characters had a horror game, but it's no longer available or able to be downloaded, and 1 character is Sonic the Hedgehog. Whoa! Man! My parents must be so proud right now. What parent can say their kid knows every single Smash Bros character that's in a horror game? My parents can. Now, there is a very real chance that I messed up this list. Maybe I forgot some random EXE game from 2015 about Rob the Robot, so please feel free to correct me or add anything on in the comments. This was definitely the most fun I've had making a video in a while. Just getting to play and research the most random shit I could find on like GameJolt and Itch.io was amazing. It also reminds me that literally any character can get a creepypasta game or EXE game or whatever. It may seem like a bunch of horror blood slop to some, but for me, it's super creative and passionate horror slop. I hope this video was somewhat entertaining and gave you an insight into the world of horror fan games, but there's one thing I need to ask of you. Make more horror games of this man right here. I need more of him in my life.